Welcome to the Alumni Festival event. I would like to introduce my colleagues, Axel, David, Jenny, Lara, and myself, Lisa.
Hello, good afternoon, and a warm welcome to CEB. My name is Lisa Hall. I'm Professor of Analytical Biotechnology here in Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology, and it's my great pleasure to be able to welcome you virtually to this department. We're a very multidisciplinary department, and we like to think that we have capability from engineering the small molecule right to the whole process. And in this conversation this afternoon, we're going to discover how far we have been able to explore and take our capabilities during this COVID-19 pandemic. But we were reminded that the world's bigger than just Cambridge. And I'd like to introduce Lara Allen to you, who pointed us in a bigger direction. Lara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Lisa. So I'm Lara, and I'm the CEO of the Centre for Global Equality, which is an organization based in Cambridge that focuses on what we call inclusive innovation. We're basically Cambridge's international development network. So we bring together academics and students and businesses and NGO people to work together in a collaborative way, basically to address the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And you very kindly have given the Centre for Global Equality a foothold in the university by enabling us to establish an inclusive innovation program in the department. It's for the benefit of the whole university, but it's established in the department. Because of your outward facing, you've always done stuff with industry, and so it was a very easy step and very easy for us to come in and interact with people in the department around questions that are not just about economic gain, but also about people and about the environment. I'm very involved in the Census doctoral training program, and so when Axel, I know Axel from the CDT, and he said to me, there's a bunch of us who are thinking of designing a ventilator for the UK pandemic ventilator challenge. So I said to him what I always say, which is, that's wonderful, and what about the rest of the world?
The rest of the world, yes.
I mean, that is pretty much whenever someone in the department comes with a really wonderful new piece of science or advanced technology, I'm always saying, oh, how could that be used to benefit people, you know, the 4 billion people in the world who live on less than $4 a day? How could this new science or technology make their lives easier? So it was not an unusual response, but it's been a very unusual and very rewarding project, which we've called OVSI, which stands for Open Ventilator System Initiative. And there's a story behind each one of those words.
So tell me the bigger scope of what you're doing and how it interfaces with the university as a whole and outside the university.
Well, I suppose we're about 70 to 80% of the work that we do and the projects that we do are with University of Cambridge academics. But legally we sit outside the university, which enables us to bring on board in an equal way people from other institutions, whether that's other universities in the UK or businesses or NGOs or multilaterals or universities in African countries. So we have strong relationships with 2 universities, one in Kenya and one in Ethiopia, who are also, like CEB, hosting inclusive innovation programs. And that means that we've got these nodes of people in these different universities who are all thinking about innovation in the same way, and therefore who work together very easily. And that has made it possible to have a team of engineers based here in Cambridge, and then a team of engineers in Kenya at the University of Nairobi, and Bahadar University in Ethiopia. And now that we're all getting used to Zoom, it is actually in some ways becoming easier to work together because we're all forced to do it, so we're getting better at it.
So it's become the norm rather than something that you just do on a Friday afternoon.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And how did the project take off? Are these the teams that have been involved in Africa, or have you also involved other teams?
So the ventilator, I mean, everyone was focusing on the ventilator itself in March and April. And that was, very strongly driven at the university from the Whittle Lab, and I'm sure people will talk about that, and with strong interactions and guidance from intensive care specialists. But what's been very exciting from a CEB point of view has actually been the concentrator, the oxygen concentrator project. Because on doing just a little bit of background work, we realized that while ventilators are key, in fact, if you don't have a supply of oxygen, it's not very helpful, and only 20% of the hospitals in Africa have piped oxygen. So if you want oxygen, either for a ventilator, which is necessary for normal operations, or as we've learned as the pandemic has evolved, in fact, oxygen therapy without invasive ventilation is key for a very large portion of patient population. So just providing a supply of oxygen is likely to save many lives. The way in which we're doing the concentrator project is not just designing a very exciting concentrator based on research coming out of CEB, but it's evolving a model of interaction, a way of co-creating this kind of thing, so that what we invent really is context appropriate. It really is what the end users want and need in the countries that they're intended for, because they're involved in the design from the beginning.
And is that the secret to these developments that bridge continents and bridge cultures, to have teams at both ends?
Well, it's definitely part of the secret. I mean, if you want to use innovative new science and technology to really address those intransigent problems that we just haven't managed to solve, and that we're going to need to solve if 9 billion of us are going to fit in one world, there's the opportunity of this new science, which is enjoyed by the educated elite of the world. And whether that's people at Cambridge University or leading scientists in African universities or elsewhere, it's a very small portion of the population who have the understanding of what that science can offer. Mm-hmm. And then there's the people that need that new thing. And then there's what we would call the intermediaries, the NGOs or the governments, and the people who make it possible to get that new widget or approach or whatever it is to who needs it. So whether you start with a challenge or whether you start with the opportunity of the new science, I personally don't think it matters, as long as it feeds into what we call a co-creation cycle. So it's just a fancy word for a dialogue. So you can join
the bits together.
If you don't dialogue, if you don't iteratively try something, have a conversation, if it doesn't have that sort of iterative evolution, it's never going to be exactly what's needed. And so you need scientists in country, you need scientists here, you need to be talking all the time from the beginning with end users, so human-centered design approach. Mm-hmm.
So let's hear some more about the development of the ventilator. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Axel. Axel, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and the research that you normally do?
Right, yes, that's a good point. So in the department, I'm the professor for microstructure engineering, and my research really is more on spectroscopy, developing tools to characterize materials, and predominantly in the pharmaceutical industry. So really nothing to do with airflows of any sort, or ventilators indeed.
So how did you come to send your efforts in the direction of ventilators?
Well, I suppose in many ways it's a good example for how the university in Cambridge is working in different ways to other places, and that we have the departments where we do all of our day-to-day research and have our research groups, but at the same time, of course, we have the positions in college as well. So I'm a fellow in Gonville Keys College, and when the lockdown happened, there was a very lively discussion really going around between the medics in the college and the scientists and the engineers. And so at that point, a lot of the discussion was really focusing on disease modeling, but it got us talking how to respond with regards to the predicted shortfall of ventilators, even in the UK. So there was a lot going on, and it was really by chance in that way. But then within a few days of thought, really, we had a team together. So that was quite remarkable. So the process from coming up with, oh, wouldn't this be a good idea, to having a first call to bring people together from really different variety of roles to actually putting something together in the lab was within a few days. Yeah.
I think we've got a video of some of the developments. Are you able to talk us through it a little bit of what's been put together and how it all works?
Yeah, so in a way, when we got the permission by the engineering department to use the Whittle laboratory, that was, I think, on a Friday afternoon. And over from Friday to Monday morning, the team of engineers in the Whittle laboratory started to take this initial design that Tash had developed, or that he thought about, and tested it first of all with very simple tools that they could find in the lab, or not simple tools, but very simple components that they could find in the laboratory. So tubes that were lying around, the mixing tank for the oxygen in the air were empty drinks bottles, and you know, I mean, there were sort of Jubilee clips being used to bolt things together. So it was a real sort of garage type project in terms of how it looked like, but the design was already a really good one. And so this was really a proof of concept within a few days. Can we fit into what the pandemic ventilator challenge for the UK would require us to do? And at the same time, we were having the discussion with Lara Allen from the Centre for Global Equality, really highlighting, well, if we want to make a big difference, we need to look further into Africa as well, maybe as one area of interest, really pointing us to the need there. But also we had a connection with intensive care medics from Addenbrooke's who have experience in working in African countries, and Tashif Ramzander from the Greenwich Aerothermal, who had come up with the design originally as well. He had links back to South Africa as well, to their intensive care medics there. So we started to think really quickly, okay, we can come up with a design that complies with the minimum requirements that we would need in the West to keep a patient alive for a few hours, a few days even. But it became very quickly it became clear that we needed something quite a bit more sophisticated, because interestingly, while a simple ventilator is useful in Western countries where a patient can be moved on from an initial stage of keeping a patient alive to then being transferred to an intensive care ventilator, that infrastructure simply doesn't exist in sub-Saharan Africa. There are too few ventilators around. So it became clear that we needed to do something slightly more sophisticated, really, than what was required here. And Tash's design was really beautiful in that regard, in that it was adaptable. So it wasn't confined to operating in one mode. So it could do different types of ventilation to the patient, and it also was very resourceful with the amount of oxygen needed to supply to a patient. So it could be deployed in an environment where little resource was available. when it became clear that the design was working, the team at the Whittle then started to rapidly prototype this design into something a little bit more manufacturable. So they started to 3D print new parts. They looked at the supply chain, what's available in parts, which parts are becoming scarce, because of course all different countries started to produce ventilators or started to explore how to produce ventilators, which meant that people were after components everywhere around the world. So even though you can come up with a design that works really nicely, it's of no use, of course, in a pandemic if you can't source the components. And I think this is really what set our project apart from other initiatives that started forming during this period, and that we had this guidance through our industrial partners, through our partners in Africa, but also through the experience of the guys in the Whittle laboratory who knew how to bring something from a prototype to something that can actually be manufactured.
Something that could fly, metaphorically and literally.
Absolutely. So they were very inventive in bringing in the knowledge they had from fluid dynamics, how certain airflows work in these components they normally design, how they could bring in this knowledge into making a ventilator more robust, relying on less components, more mechanical control rather than lots of fancy electronics that can fail. So really stripping back the functionality to what's needed, but making it the best it can be. And in many ways, the ventilator the teams come up with is just an amazingly stable system. So it really doesn't lag behind the performance of far more sophisticated systems, but potentially at a fraction of the price, and in a way that can be produced in South Africa, for instance, and other countries in due course.
And Professor Jeff Mogridge became involved at one point too, didn't he? And he normally is designing heart valves.
Absolutely, and there was already a great collaboration going on, because the heart valves that Jeff is designing, they get machined, the parts for the injection molding process already get machined in the Whittle laboratory. So there was a really nice overlap in that the team, again, the people involved knew one another already. But that made a big difference now, because the second prototype was then a system that was 3D printed, so rapidly prototyped into fancier components, thinking about how to make it manufacturable. But 3D printing isn't really a process that can scale very nicely, but also the air tightness of what you print with the 3D printer and the compatibility of the polymers that you can print to medical grade oxygen and all the regulatory requirements that come with a medical device of that nature are really incompatible. So it's important to move from that 3D printing to a process that can scale. And injection molding is the prime process that can be used in this context, or that is used to make components of that nature. And Jeff's group is specializing on how you select the right materials, how you make the process of injection molding work for those medical devices. He also knows how important the regulatory aspects are, so the material selection and the process itself, how it comes together to make components that can be used in a ventilator. So his group really jumped into the challenge, and it was amazing. I mean, one beautiful aspect I found of OFSI, of this consortium that came together, was that it really included technicians, undergraduate students, graduate students, postdocs, academics, industrial partners, people from medical teams in the ICU ward that would dial in the evening after they finished their shift, people from across Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, South Africa, industrial contacts. So it's this huge diversity of people and enthusiasm that came together was really inspiring.
And all seeded because we meet together in our colleges for lunch very often.
Absolutely, and I think that is really difficult to overestimate. Really, that link between people and understanding what people do and how to approach them, and you know, that personal interaction and trust that's needed. In particular, when a project like this starts from the bottom up, there was no funding in place to get this project off the ground. Everybody chipped in with what they had. And of course, that requires a level of trust that you would really find difficult to build otherwise.
Yes, I always say that if I need to know something that's outside my field, I'll go and have lunch in college, because there will be somebody who can help me.
Absolutely, and of course at Keys we're very proud of our dining tradition. So we are we are very excited about that aspect in our community.
And at Queen's too, but of course that's a stop for the moment. So tell me, where is the ventilator project now?
Well, so where we're at now is that we're able to translate our prototypes to a manufacturable design together with partners in Banbury, a commercial company called ProDrive, automotive company that equally had a hiatus during the lockdown. They were looking for challenges to take on, and introduction were made through a team on the OFSI project, and they got a whole team of engineers to take our design that we developed in the Whittle laboratory into something that could be further linked into supply chains in the automotive industry. Because of course we thought, when we started out, our motivation was to come up with a Toyota pickup truck of ventilators. So something that is robust, that's reliable, that can be repaired in the field, that is really a trusted sort of companion that will work for years to come. And that link with the automotive industry was quite deliberate as well, because we thought if the supply chains in the medical field collapsed during the pandemic, the automotive side, they can't provide all the parts at medical grade, but a lot of the parts that don't need to be medical grade to control the system, to bring it together, they would still be available. So our partners at ProDrive were really helpful to bring that design up a notch. And then in parallel, we were very fortunate that at the Whittle team, we had a colleague, an engineer on board from Beko. And Beko is a leading Turkish white goods manufacturer in Europe, of course. But they had contacts through their corporate structure with a subsidiary of Beko called DeFi in South Africa. Now, when we came up with this design and when we refined the design in the Whittle laboratory, it became evident quite quickly that this isn't a device that would be suitable to be manufactured in a sort of a maker space type environment. This is a serious production effort, and considerable infrastructure is needed to make it, but also to get it through regulation, because that regulatory process for a ventilator is not just the design, but also the manufacturing process, the production line to it. And so they, Beko, saw the opportunity in this design and was so impressed by what the group had done that they got us introductions to DeFi in South Africa. And DeFi has been building further productionizing in this three-way relationship between the Whittle laboratory team of OFSI, ProDrive in Banbury, and DeFi down in South Africa. They've been taking this design forward, and they've now iterated it to a pre-production stage where they've been recently just building 20 units in South Africa. They've gone back to, one or two of those units have come back to the UK. They've been tested at the National Physics Laboratory, and they are that good now that one of the units is staying there as a reference ventilator for the NPL. But a little bit more work is needed on the electronics side, on the control electronics, because that's a big challenge in the regulatory process. But we're hopeful that the regulatory process in South Africa is going to commence soon, and that we will have a device ready in the near future that is both performing well, but is also known to be safe and tested, and there's a production line for it, and it can be scaled.
So it seems that oxygen supplies are also a potential problem in this. And so I'd like to introduce my colleague, David. David, over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So my name is David Fairan Jimenez. I'm a reader at the Department of Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology. And the field of expertise we have is basically we work with porous materials, and we try to develop new materials for gas storage, gas separation applications. Traditionally, we have been working on applications such as carbon capture or hydrogen storage, but we also saw an important opportunity here on this COVID-19 crisis, where we can try to use all the knowledge and know-how we have and try to help the society by providing materials who can separate oxygen from nitrogen.
So tell us a bit more about what you did and how you went about making this happen.
I think something that was quite important here is that we also had some experience with industry. So we have been working for many years with different industrial companies, trying to see how can we really translate the materials we develop in the lab to manufacture, and how can we really start producing this on mass scale. We also had a spin-out company, so we had a way to be able to develop a full network of people, a consortium of different companies and different expertises, trying to bring these materials into reality.
And what sort of progress have you managed to make?
So it was a very interesting project, because obviously we had all the expertise from the material science side, but we didn't have the expertise on the mechanical engineering process, for example, trying to develop a rig, trying to do some testing, trying to really be able to create this equipment and have something that is not only working in the lab on a gram scale, but something that can really help here and produce liters of oxygen, pure oxygen. So far, in the last 4 months, we have been developing this testing rig, and by last week we are almost done with the test rig. So now we are really moving into the next phase, which is really start with the testing of the rig. Once this is tested, then the next steps are going to be producing a prototype. Okay, we will try to say, okay, what is going to be the best conditions for the oxygen nitrogen separation? How can we really produce this? What is really required in order to start sharing these ideas.
And do you anticipate that this will link in with the ventilator, and so that you have a fully integrated oxygen producing and ventilating system?
So this is one of the beauty, this is a little bit the beauty of this project. It is not only about creating a ventilator or an oxygen concentrator or different solutions. What I really liked was the idea of being able to link all these different ideas people were working on at the University of Cambridge and in our department in particular. So this connects very well with the ventilator, because whenever you need to use a ventilator, you will need to use an oxygen concentrator just to produce the amount of oxygen that the patient will need. But this is also even more important than just the ventilator, because many patients that don't require a ventilator or a CPAP or a much more intrusive system, they will still benefit from having a supply of oxygen. And this is really, really important. So you can have many patients, they don't need to go to these intensive care beds, they don't need to have the ventilator installed, but they just need to have a little bit of help with an extra supply of oxygen. In particular in Africa, which is this project is really focusing at, we have seen that ventilators are important. Yes, there is a need for that, but there is a huge need for oxygen. And this is also going for COVID-19, but for also future medical problems. I mean, oxygen in Africa is an important problem that we people need to solve. Something that is also very important is the fact that in order to be able to really understand what is required for developing this oxygen concentrator. I mean, I'm talking about the collaborations we have in around Cambridge, so CEB, different industrial partners. But something that is very important is also this collaboration we have with the people in Nairobi, in Kenya, and also in Ethiopia. So we are working with the universities there. I mean, we are really trying to develop a good collaboration with the people from Ethiopia in particular. We are trying to have the same test rig. So we are using the same kind of device. we can really try to see what are the challenges they will have, what are the challenges we will have, and how can we really solve them. With the people from Kenya in Nairobi, they have a slightly different device, but it's based on the same ideas. And still, we will collaborate, providing the zeolite materials and trying to see, again, what are the problems they are going to have, the problems we are going to have, how can we really solve all them. Then the next step will be to start producing the equipment. And for this, again, we are going to have two different possibilities. We are going to explore both at the same time. We will do some manufacturing in the UK, with Cambridge Precision in particular, is something we are talking to, try to see how can we really produce these devices. With the people from Ethiopia and Kenya, also working with them, trying to see how can we do manufacture these equipments on site. Okay, how can we really get all the expertise that is really required.
So we've heard a lot about the activities that CEB has been able to pull together and make a real difference in relation to COVID. But we've also had other activities in infectious disease and biotechnology that have suddenly had a change of direction as a result of COVID. I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Jenny Malloy. Jenny.
Hi. So I'm a Shuttleworth Fellow in Chemical Engineering Biotechnology here in Cambridge, and my research is around supply chains for molecular diagnostics and reagents for molecular biology research.
So tell us something about what you've done in setting up facilities in sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, over the last 2.5 years, I've been working with colleagues to establish labs in Ghana and Cameroon, where we can provide education for producing tools for research, and also set up a manufacturing facility, particularly in Cameroon in this case, to produce the types of tools that biologists need in the lab and that they struggle to get for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's having to ship on cold chain that introduces delays, sometimes stuff gets stuck in customs. And so we're exploring this idea of local manufacturing of the fundamental tools that biologists need to do their work. And the nice thing about that is it's the same tools that are actually directly involved in applied research and in direct healthcare applications like molecular diagnostics. So although the manufacturing conditions are different, it's the same technology. And so we're trying to come up with really good methods of manufacturing those tools in resource-constrained conditions to try and increase access and kind of boost research and innovation in sub-Saharan Africa.
And I believe you've had some rather exciting trips to the local market looking for pressure cookers and other things that you can resource locally.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're trying to really look at the entire supply chain for setting up molecular biology labs, and where we can sort of hack it a little bit and find local producers of things that we need. And so yeah, my postdoc Kiara has had some exciting trips to locate chemicals from shops that sell supplies for soap making, for example. So it's really trying to think, what are consumer commodities that you can find easily and that are good enough for the research that we need to do. And so they're never quite the same grade as you would find from a scientific supplier, but in some cases that's not a problem. I mean, it's enough to do what we need. And so we found, pressure cookers make pretty effective autoclaves. There's also suppliers of a whole range of chemicals for other industries that, with the right quality control before you use them for science and research, are much more accessible. And for we've tried to ship chemicals to Cameroon during the pandemic. Sometimes it's been quick, sometimes it's taken up to 2 months. And so anything that we can do to kind of reduce the time frame just really accelerates the work of our colleagues and the ability of them to actually be innovative in what they're doing and to really take some risks and have the chance to explore a field, as opposed to always being constrained to doing kind of low risk experiments because they are in a kind of condition of resource scarcity. And so we're trying to find innovative ways around that problem and give them the abundance of tools and resources that they need to do their best work.
Local manufacturers or local production of anything is really important, isn't it, in these low-income countries, these low-resource areas, in enabling them to be able to purchase a medical device or any other vital piece of equipment. And I think it's probably a couple of years ago that we discovered the overlap between your work and my team's work infectious disease diagnostics.
Absolutely, yes. It's that our thinking had converged
Yes.
with slightly different technology choices, but a very kind of the approach is very similar. And I think the challenge that we identified is basically the same challenge, is that it's, you know, that if you're in a developing country accessing the items that you need, and, you know, to focus on diagnostics, for example, you're really priced out of that market.
Mm-hmm.
And this has kind of been true for a very long time. The kind of added benefit, the added value benefit of local manufacturing is also that it builds local capacity. And so you're kind of, it's hoping to create this virtuous cycle of being able to produce diagnostics that are suitable for the local market, that are adapted to local needs, that are actually affordable to the local markets as well. But in doing so, you're also allowing that money to be invested in the economy, as opposed to being, you know, taken immediately overseas and invested elsewhere. And so that's the sort of the ecosystem that we want to set up, is one where it's a supportive whole, and it kind of cycles in such a way that you can really enable access to better healthcare while also growing the economy.
Of course, in the last few months, everybody's suddenly understood what a nucleic acid diagnostic is, and this is where my team have been active, not for COVID originally, but for malaria and dengue and leptospirosis. But it's the same technique, it's the
Absolutely.
same diagnostic, and we know that in a low-income country, the cost of the enzyme that you need for these assays is between 60 and 85% of the total cost, and it's expensive. It's ludicrously expensive for a low income area, because it's equivalent to a week to a month's food, and who's going to make that choice?
Yeah. Absolutely, and like you say, it's ludicrous in terms of the cost of production when you think really hard about the manufacturing. And that's, I think that, you know, my project has always been fairly application agnostic. We wanted to produce the tools and sort of let people run with them. And so it's been great to kind of team up with your group, thinking very kind of focused on molecular diagnostics as an application. I think there's so much that you can do in that space, even pre the current times.
Yes.
Looking at all sorts of diseases. And like you say, it's a very flexible tool. And so once you've kind of cracked it for one problem, not to trivialize the amount of work that goes into transferring it to another problem, but, you know, the foundation really gives you a lot to build upon. And I think that the sort of the ability of tools to be transferred also into other areas like industrial biotechnology, like other areas of the kind of bioeconomy, is just a really interesting space where you can be very led by the needs of the collaborators as well. And so you're developing interesting technology, but you can kind of be flexible to the sort of achieving the impact that you need to achieve with your partners. And I think that's another really nice area of working sort of both broad and narrow at the same time. Is a really exciting space to be.
Yes, we discovered that one of the main areas where cost increased was in the downstream processing, the isolation and the purification of the enzymes, and so we focused on doing something about that. And I think we have a short video that shows one of my team, Cassie Henderson, working in the lab and showing how we made the enzyme pink so that you could see it and you could work with it without needing expensive tools. And we put a sticky tag on that stuck to sand, which you could collect from the beach. And we cut the whole processing down to a single step where the enzyme sticks to the sand. We have nice pink sand, and we can use this as our enzyme for a nucleic acid diagnostic. We, of course, were working on malaria until March this year.
Yeah.
And then, of course, our attention turned, and we have managed to obtain funding for us to do a clinical trial in Ghana. And we're going to be working with some of the collaborators that you've been working with in setting up the biotech facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really good example of how kind of having those strong foundations and links in place before something like this happens is really important to be able to kind of get off the ground quickly in response to a challenge like COVID. And so that's been really exciting to be able to bring together the right group to tackle that problem. And I think a few things about the sort of process that you set up really exemplify that this common approach that sort of is a thread between our two projects, as much as they have some differences. And that's, you know, a focus on local resources, so sand readily available, a focus on making the biology do the heavy lifting. So, you know, a lot of these downstream processes, you're talking about chemical processing, you're talking about a lot of kind of different steps that are expensive, but also that require people that have real expertise in doing things like attaching enzymes to materials, whereas, you know, taking inspiration from nature, you know, there are diatoms and there are organisms that already attach proteins to compounds like silica, which is found in sand. And so it's that sort of, you know, bio-inspired and allowing the biology to do most of the work for you, and you just have to come in at the end, and also kind of keeping that person focused. So yeah, having it, you can see it, you don't have to kind of, you know, as molecular biologists, we get very used to working with colourless liquids, tiny amounts of colourless liquids that we move around between tubes, and we have to use quite sophisticated instruments to even know what they are. But just having, you know, it's pink, the enzyme is there, I mean, that's a fantastic kind of user-focused innovation that really is not only useful in low resource settings, and this is another thing that's nice about
yes,
our
because
work,
we're enjoying it here too,
exactly,
aren't we?
yeah, so it makes our work and our life in the lab and our team's life in the lab easier as well.
So I think we've got some video of the labs in Ghana that are currently being used for COVID testing. The facilities are quite meagre, aren't they, for the whole country? I believe they started with just 2 testing labs.
Just 2 testing labs, although they're ramping up quite rapidly, and there are still more being built in Accra and that have been moved around the country. So when we were drafting our proposal, the capacity was around 4,500 tests a day, and that's been increased rapidly. But in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, one of the nice things about working with Ghana is that they've, in terms of other countries of their size, they've tested many people, and they were very early and rapid with their track and trace program. They also innovated, and so they were one of the first countries to start using pooled samples as well, to really increase capacity. And so that was one of the things that Ghana did very early on. And by all accounts, you know, they've been very active in the testing space and really ramped that up. So although they started with just a couple of labs who rapidly developed a backlog, they are now setting up more and more at pace, and also introducing sequencing. And, you know, the Africa CDC and other kind of bodies on the continent have really been pulling together different labs to really investigate what's going on, because the dynamics of the virus in Africa are playing out somewhat differently to what we're seeing in Europe. And it's still a little unclear whether that's because of, you know, different modes of transmission, whether it's because it's a younger population overall. There is a lot of reasons why that might be the case. And so there's a lot of drive now to get real research and surveillance underway. And Ghana is kind of ahead of the game in terms of its neighbours, because they really got off the mark pretty quickly with setting these labs up. And that was one of the reasons why it's been so useful to work with them, because we're going into an environment with a new test where the previous technique is really established, and so it's going to be much easier to compare, you know, whether our technique or the technique of our collaborators, which uses a much simplified system for molecular testing, and then our local manufacturing, locally made enzymes really work. So I'm excited to be in that environment and engaging also with, you know, people at the government level and the sort of UN agencies in Ghana to really understand how it all fits together.
So as of next month, we will be taking diagnostic kits out to Ghana. We will be training the Ghanaians in production of the enzyme for a nucleic acid test for COVID-19. And we will be seeing whether a test which is where the materials are produced in Ghana can compete with the gold standard test. So, Axel, it's been strange times, hasn't it? We've learned new ways of working. We've discovered that as a department, we really can use our multidisciplinarity, and that our capabilities to tackle problems are exciting.
It has really. I mean, it's been very strange indeed. But at the same time, this maybe has made us all think a bit differently about what we do, how we do it, why we want to do certain types of research, and how we can come together as a department to build an interesting, or to take this opportunity now to bring us into a different direction. I mean, for years we've been leading in many fields of chemical engineering and biotechnology, and that's a core competency that we don't want to give up. And we all very strongly feel, of course, that our discipline makes a meaningful impact to our society and to the wider world. But there are these really exciting opportunities how we can maybe take forward chemical engineering and biotechnology into different areas that, by the very nature of our different skills and the connections we can make here in Cambridge and beyond, wouldn't be otherwise possible. And this sort of pause that we all had to go through, that sort of moment of taking a breath and reorienting has been quite refreshing in some way.
It certainly has. The voyage of discovery probably began for us even before COVID, when we realized that we had such a rich diversity of capability here, and the projects that many of us were involved in were really contributing to the global challenges, I think particularly in healthcare and energy. And it's been a wonderful experience to actually have to put those capabilities on the table and bring them together in different mixtures and discover that the sum of the parts is much greater than we ever imagined.
It's absolutely right. I think we've started some sort of a process of redefining where we wanted to go strategically. We had a strategic research review not long ago. We've been soul searching a little bit. Of course, the challenges around climate change are intricately linked to what we do in the department in terms of opportunities where we can make a difference. But this has really been a catalyzing moment, I guess, in that we have been starting to think wider already. We've been making connections. We've been taking stock of what we've done and what capability we've got. But the situation we found ourselves in really gave us this moment of, okay, let's do something. Let's move forward, and rather than worry about what we can't do, see what we can do and where it can take us. And so that's a really exciting journey. I think that I hope this is the start, and I'm sure this is the start of us as a department, and maybe also the wider chemical engineering and biotechnology community in the UK can take this challenge on and make something of it.
Well, there's such an enormous talent pool here that finding those people who can contribute to an effort is liberating, I think, for all of us, so that it takes us out of our department, it takes us out of the work that we're usually doing, and has given us a great opportunity to explore our limits further.
I hope that you've enjoyed our conversation on the work that we have been doing in the last months during the COVID lockdown in Cambridge, and then as it expanded as we were able to reopen the research facilities. I would like to invite you to put any questions that you have into the Q&A box, and we will try and answer them. While we've been talking to you, there have been some questions that we've already answered on the extent to which CGE is active in including students from the Global South, and although Lara, you've already given a written answer, perhaps you'd like to say a few more words about our links to students and indeed researchers in general in other countries.
Sure, thanks, Lisa. Students from the Global South are quite obviously absolutely key in terms of what CGE is doing, because, well, for all of you who've been to Cambridge, you know that it's an incredibly international place. But to have students that come from the countries in which that have the populations in which we're trying to enhance their lives enables us to stay connected and to stay grounded. Students from the Global South are part of everything we do. We would like more students from the Global South to be involved, and whenever they do come to us and say we'd like to help, we integrate them and as soon as we can. It's just key. We can't do what we do without those students. But I'd like to just mention that the organization that has actually worked very closely with OBSI through this program that is key from that point of view is Cambridge Africa. So CGE works closely with Cambridge Africa. There's somebody from CEB is on, that's Roisin is on Cambridge Africa board. So there's a very strong connection between us and Cambridge Africa. And Axel, I think you've also been very supportive of students from Africa who are specifically focusing on science. So maybe you'd like to say something about that.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few communities that we've been able to tap into in this process. And I think it's been a big learning exercise all around for us, because of course this project is quite dynamic and things have changed quickly. And we had a lot of support from the students who kind of saw what we're trying to achieve, but then also can really help with the skills here in Cambridge, but also then help us talk about what we're doing and guide us in where we need to go. And so having that support in Cambridge is fantastic. And I think it's been one of the really great aspects of the project to have that link from undergraduate students all the way through to faculty members and then making the links with the outside world. It's been good fun and it's been very important. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to move to a question that we've received on how are you finding scaling the regulations and financing behind these COVID projects between the ventilator and virus testing, and how can the alumni support this work? I'm going to ask Jenny to say a few words on how we have become engaged in this problem of regulation across low-income countries that have not been used to doing regulation for medical related devices. So Jenny, would you like to say something?
Of course, yeah. So it's a very challenging area, and particularly the viral diagnostics, both the medical device and the diagnostics are challenging. They both have slightly different regulations. In some cases, the virus testing is even more challenging simply because of the variety of tests that are currently being developed. And so whenever we're working on, for example, with AfriDX, which is the project that was discussed in Ghana, we have work packages specifically around regulation. And we're engaging very early on with the Ministry of Health and trying to understand how best to get the stuff that we're producing through those processes, but it is very complicated. And as Lisa mentioned, particularly countries that have not typically dealt with manufacturing their own equipment. So many countries have, reasonably robust procedures for imported medical devices and diagnostics, but not necessarily for in-country production. And so there isn't a very easy answer to that, but lots of groups are suffering the same issues. And so through this work that I've been doing with Lisa, I'm now working with the UN Technology Access Partnership, which is a consortium of the WHO, the UNDP, UNCTAD and the UN Technology Bank. And we have an entire working group dedicated to regulation, one of many across all of these organisations, and everybody is in the same boat. So we're working with as many agencies as we can to find a way through the thicket, but it really is challenging, and it's very busy for a lot of these regulatory agencies. So that's regulation, and then scaling and financing is also an issue for all the projects to get going, particularly with distributed manufacturing, because you're potentially looking at different sites as well that need to be established and set up. The quality assurance processes have to be put in place. So at all levels of that process, I'm sure there are many things that if alumni have expertise or connections, we would be delighted to hear from you. It's just the urgency of the situation means that wherever help is coming from, we're more than grateful to accept and sort of connect with people who think they may be able to have some input in that area.
Yes, that's indeed the case. For the diagnostics project, we've had we've received funding for clinical trials. For the ventilator project, Axel, would you like to explain the complexity of that?
Yeah, well, maybe very briefly, I guess it's a bit unique in this project that we've come into all partners in this project. None of us has ever made a medical device or had any idea about regulations when we started off. So we had to learn really, really quickly as we went along. And with a medical device like a ventilator, it's not just the design that needs to be regulated, but then also the production process. And of course, regulation is specific to each country. And so it's been really, really tricky for us to understand the electronics regulation, the mechanical airflows and so on. But we've been so fortunate, really, I guess, to work with a manufacturing partner, to have found somebody in South Africa who's willing to go this process together with the local regulator. So that's conversation has started, the process has started. We're a long way away from having it completed, but we're absolutely keen to make sure it's getting done properly to the highest standards. But yeah, we could do with any help. People having experience in this process, we'd really love to hear from you, and that would be great.
And then we have a question. Does CGE envisage following Cambridge's excellent example by establishing a presence in chemical engineering or biotech departments in other universities? Lara, I think that's one for you.
I'm glad I don't have to type the answer to that one. So the short answer is yes. I mean, we are planning, we are hoping to be able to establish inclusive innovation programs in as many universities who would like to have them. It's just there's only a few of us, so we need to raise funds to make this happen. But it wouldn't just be chemical engineering and biotechnology. It would be, you know, across all the different disciplines in other university departments. Very key to this, and I know we've got alumni from all over the world, is establishing partnerships in low and middle income countries. So we have, the reason why OVSI is possible in the way that it is because we've got inclusive innovation partnerships in Kenya and Ethiopia. And we'd very much like to, and Jenny and Lisa, you've got strong collaborations with Ghana. The only way we can really make this happen in the longer run at scale is to do it wherever there's somebody enthusiastic to make it happen. So if you think you might be one of those influencers or people with energy, I'm sure just get in contact with us and we'll find a way.
Thank you very much, Lara, and thank you, Axel, David, and Jenny, and the events team who've assisted us in telling you about what we're doing today. It's actually touching the iceberg, and the excitement in CEB in addressing global challenges, particularly in healthcare and energy, has enormous impetus at the moment. We would be delighted to be able to have the opportunity to tell you more. So please keep in contact with us. If you have ideas that you think we should hear about or would like us to hear about, do tell us. And thank you very much for joining us today and listening to our conversation with you.